Most people think influence is about having better arguments, sharper words, or a personality so bright it should probably come with a warning label. Dale Carnegie's book begins somewhere less glamorous and much more uncomfortable. If you want people to like you, listen to you, cooperate with you, forgive you, and maybe even change because of you, the first person you have to manage is not them. It is you. Welcome to this book summary series on how to win friends and influence people by Dale Carnegie. In this opening part, we walk through the frame of the book and the 3 fundamental techniques Carnegie gives for handling people. Do not criticize, give honest appreciation, and speak in terms of the other person's wants. Carnegie's starting point is almost rude in its simplicity. People do not experience themselves as villains. Even when they are wrong, difficult, vain, careless, or self-serving, they usually have a story in which their behavior makes sense. That is why criticism often fails. It attacks the story people use to live with themselves. The first chapter gives this idea through examples of criminals, politicians, executives, and ordinary family life. Carnegie is not saying nobody is ever wrong. He is saying that blame rarely produces the response we imagine. We picture criticism entering the other person's brain as a useful memo. What usually happens is closer to setting off a tiny courtroom. The accused person becomes the defense lawyer, the judge, the witness, and the outraged public, all at once. His first principle is simple. Do not criticize, condemn, or complain. That does not mean tolerate everything. It means understand the cost of direct attack. Criticism wounds pride, threatens importance, and makes people justify themselves. Carnegie returns often to this central idea. Human beings are not logic machines with brief, emotional interruptions. We are emotional creatures who sometimes use logic as paperwork after the decision has already been made. He uses Abraham Lincoln as one of his strongest examples. In his younger years, Lincoln could be cutting and sarcastic. He learned, painfully, that ridicule creates enemies faster than it creates improvement. Later, during the Civil War, he became famous for restraint. When General Meade failed to pursue Lee after Gettysburg, Lincoln wrote a furious letter and did not send it. Carnegie treats that unsent letter as a masterclass. Lincoln felt the anger, but he also imagined the other man's view. Exhausted soldiers, blood-soaked fields, impossible pressure, and imperfect information. The lesson is not that Lincoln had no standards. It is that he knew condemnation is often a luxury paid for with cooperation. This is where the book's tone becomes practical. Carnegie is not writing moral philosophy from a mountaintop. He is asking, what actually works with people? If you want better behavior, what makes improvement more likely? The answer, again and again, is that people change more readily when their self-respect survives the conversation. The second fundamental technique builds on that. Give honest and sincere appreciation. Carnegie says one of the deepest human drives is the desire to feel important. Food, sleep, money, and safety matter, but after those, people ache to be noticed, valued, and recognized. He is careful to separate appreciation from flattery. Flattery is cheap sugar. It is usually selfish, vague, and easy to detect. Appreciation requires attention. You have to see what is actually there. This chapter explains why Charles Schwab became such a famous manager. Carnegie presents him not as a technical genius, but as a man who knew how to awaken enthusiasm. Schwab understood that people work better when someone notices their effort, trusts their possibility, and gives credit publicly instead of hoarding it like office stationery. The modern reader may hear this and think, yes, fine, appreciation is nice. But Carnegie is making a sharper claim. Appreciation is not decoration, it is fuel. People often carry private doubts and hidden resentments. A sincere word at the right moment can make them stand taller, try harder, and feel that their work matters. A careless criticism can make the same person retreat. This is why Carnegie warns against the easy habit of seeing only what is wrong. Many homes, offices, and friendships slowly become complaint factories. The good is expected. The bad gets a press conference. Someone cooks dinner, finishes a task, handles a problem, remembers a detail, shows up on time, keeps a promise, silence. Then one thing goes wrong, and suddenly everyone has excellent communication skills. Carnegie's point is that people do not flourish under permanent emotional debt. If you want influence, become the kind of person who notices value before absence. But he also insists on sincerity. This is not a trick where you sprinkle compliments like glitter and wait for obedience. If the appreciation is false, people feel handled. If it is real, they feel seen. The difference matters. The third fundamental technique is the most strategic: arouse in the other person an eager want. Here, Carnegie shifts from emotional restraint to persuasion. Most people try to get cooperation by talking about what they want. I need this report. I want you to buy this. I want my child to study. I want the customer to call back. I want my friend to stop doing that unbelievably annoying thing with the group chat. Carnegie says this is backwards. Other people are not moved by our wants merely because we have announced them with confidence. They're moved by their own wants. Influence begins when you connect your request to something the other person already cares about. The chapter gives a famous example of fishing. You may love strawberries and cream, but fish prefer worms. So when you fish, you do not bait the hook with your favorite dessert. Simple, obvious, and somehow ignored in human conversation every day. Parents tell children what parents want. Salespeople tell customers what salespeople want. Managers tell employees what managers want. Partners tell each other what they personally need, often while barely translating it into the other person's world. Carnegie's advice is to reverse the lens. Ask what the other person wants, fears, hopes for, avoids, or values. Then show how the path you propose serves that want. This can sound manipulative if read lazily. But Carnegie's best version is not manipulation. It is empathy with a purpose. You're still trying to move someone, yes, but you're doing it by respecting the fact that they have their own inner life. The three opening principles form the foundation for the whole book. Do not attack people's pride. Feed their legitimate need for importance. Speak from their desires, not only yours. Together, these principles explain why the title is not merely how to win arguments. It is how to win friends and influence people. Carnegie sees friendship and influence as connected. You cannot separate persuasion from human feeling. People listen differently to someone who does not humiliate them. They cooperate differently with someone who appreciates them. They respond differently when their own motives are understood. There is also a deeper discipline underneath all of this. The book asks you to pause before reacting. Before you criticize, ask what defense your words will awaken. Before you complain, ask whether you have noticed anything worth appreciating. Before you persuade, ask whether you are speaking to your own desire or theirs. That pause is where the book lives. It is easy to reduce Carnegie to old-fashioned politeness. Smile, remember names, be nice. But the opening section is tougher than that. It says your ego may be the biggest obstacle in the room. Your need to be right, to correct, to vent, to prove, to win the little courtroom in your head. All of that may cost you the relationship or cooperation you actually wanted. So part one is not soft. It is demanding. It asks you to give up the cheap pleasure of criticism, the laziness of neglecting appreciation, and the self-centeredness of arguing only from your own wants. Carnegie's promise is practical. If you change your approach to people, people will often change their response to you. Not always. The book is not magic. Some people will remain difficult because apparently human civilization was not challenging enough without them. But Carnegie is not asking whether every person can be won. He is asking whether your usual habits make winning people more likely or less likely. The answer is uncomfortably clear. In the next part, we move into Carnegie's 6 ways to make people like you, beginning with genuine interest, a simple smile, and the surprisingly powerful sound of a person's own name. The first victory in influence is not saying the perfect thing. It is becoming the kind of person other people do not need to defend themselves against. There is a strange shortcut to being liked, and it is not becoming louder, funnier, richer, better dressed, or the human version of a motivational poster. Carnegie's shortcut is much more demanding. Become genuinely interested in other people, not performatively interested, not waiting for your turn to speak interested, actually interested. Carnegie. In this part, we begin part 2 of the book, 6 Ways to Make People Like You. We cover the first 3 habits. Show genuine interest, smile, and remember that a person's name matters deeply to them. The first habit is the foundation. Become genuinely interested in other people. Carnegie opens this section with a blunt observation. You can make more friends by becoming interested in others than by trying to get others interested in you. That line is famous because it punctures a very common social strategy. Many people try to win attention by advertising themselves. Here are my opinions. Here are my achievements. Here is my pain, my cleverness, my resume, my playlist, my excellent analysis of why everyone else is doing life incorrectly. Carnegie says the more reliable path is to turn outward. He gives examples from dogs, public figures, sales, and everyday encounters. A dog becomes beloved not because it has a 5-point networking strategy, but because it runs toward people as if they matter. Carnegie is not asking adults to become puppies. That would create separate problems. He is pointing to the emotional truth. People warm to those who seem honestly glad to see them. Genuine interest cannot be fake for long. If you ask about someone's life only to wait for a business opening, the conversation has the warmth of a vending machine. But if you notice details, remember concerns, ask follow-up questions, and care about the answer, people feel it. This habit is especially powerful because most people feel underseen. They may be surrounded by messages, meetings, and contacts, but still rarely feel that someone is paying close attention. Carnegie's advice sounds small until you realize how rare it is. He is also clear that interest must become action. Write letters. Make calls. Remember birthdays. Ask about the project someone mentioned last month. Speak to the person who is usually ignored. Learn what matters to the other person before you ask anything from them. The principle is not merely social charm. It is respect expressed through attention. The second habit is simpler on the surface. Smile. Carnegie treats a smile as a signal. It says, "I'm glad to see you. You're not a problem walking toward me. You're welcome here." A real smile changes the emotional climate before words arrive. He tells stories of people whose careers and relationships improved when they began consciously smiling at others. Again, the modern reader may roll their eyes. Smile? That is the big secret? Wonderful. Someone please alert the universities. But Carnegie is not saying a smile solves everything. He is saying that the emotional tone you bring into a room affects what becomes possible there. People respond not only to your words, but to the feeling of your presence. If you approach others with a face that looks like a locked filing cabinet, they may not rush to open up. The key word is sincerity. A forced smile can feel like customer service holding itself together with tape. Carnegie means the kind of expression that comes from goodwill. If you do not feel it, he suggests acting as if you were cheerful, because action and feeling influence each other. This is one of his recurring practical moves. Do the behavior first, and the emotion may follow. There's a deeper point here about responsibility. Carnegie does not want you to wait until the world makes you warm. He wants you to bring warmth first. In relationships, someone has to set the tone. The person who smiles, greets, and opens the door emotionally often shapes the encounter. This does not require pretending life is perfect. A smile is not denial. It is an offering. It says, whatever else is happening, I choose not to make this interaction colder than it needs to be. The third habit is one of Carnegie's most famous. Remember that a person's name is, to that person, the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Names matter because they represent identity. To forget someone's name can feel, rightly or wrongly, like forgetting the person. To remember it can feel like recognition. Carnegie gives the example of Jim Farley, a politician known for remembering names at a remarkable scale. That memory was not a party trick. It made people feel individually important. This chapter is not really about name memorization alone. It is about personalizing attention. A name says, I have not filed you under random human, approximate height, probably work somewhere. I have noticed you. Carnegie tells readers to make the effort. Hear the name clearly. Ask for it again if needed. Repeat it. Associate it. Write it down. And use it respectfully. The effort itself is part of the message. People know when they have been treated as interchangeable. In business, this can change the tone of a relationship. In friendship, it builds warmth. In leadership, it reduces distance. In service work, it gives dignity. In any setting, it says the person is not merely a function. They are a person. These first three habits share one principle. Make the other person feel visible. Genuine interest says, your life matters enough for my attention. A smile says, your presence is welcome. A remembered name says, you are not generic to me. Carnegie's genius is that he turns ordinary behavior into deliberate practice. None of this requires brilliance. That may be the insulting part. The difficulty is not intellectual. It is emotional and habitual. We forget because we are absorbed in ourselves. We fail to smile because we are preoccupied. We do not ask questions because we are preparing our own performance. So the work is not to become dazzling. It is to become less self-absorbed. This is why Carnegie's advice has lasted. He understood that most social failure is not caused by a lack of technique. It is caused by excessive inwardness. We enter conversations thinking, how am I doing? Do they like me? What should I say next? Did I sound smart? Why did I wave like that? Was that laugh normal? Should I move to another country? Carnegie redirects the question, how are they doing? What matters to them? What name should I remember? What detail can I honor? What warmth can I bring? The shift is simple, but it changes everything. There is also a warning hidden here. If you use these habits only as tools to extract advantage, they decay. People are not fooled forever by strategic warmth. Carnegie keeps returning to sincerity because social technique without sincere regard becomes manipulation. It may work briefly, but it does not build trust. The book's better path is to practice real regard until it becomes natural. Be curious because people are interesting. Smile because warmth is better than coldness. Remember names because identity deserves respect. The reward is influence, yes, but also a better way of moving through the world. Think about the last person who made you feel truly heard. Not entertained, not impressed. Heard. There's a good chance you remember them with unusual warmth. Carnegie is teaching you how to become that person more often. And if that sounds too simple, that may be because the simplest courtesies are the ones people neglect most confidently. You. Becoming a good listener, talking in terms of the other person's interests, and making the other person feel important. To be liked, Carnegie says, do not begin by trying to be interesting. Begin by being interested. If conversation were judged by word count, the best talker in a room would be the person who never lets oxygen reach anyone else. Carnegie thinks the opposite. The best conversationalist is often the person who makes others want to speak. Carnegie. In this part, we finish the 6 ways to make people like you. Be a good listener, talk in terms of the other person's interests, and make the other person feel important sincerely. The fourth habit is to be a good listener and encourage others to talk about themselves. Carnegie's point is not that people are vain monsters who can be controlled by letting them monologue. His point is more humane. People carry stories, concerns, opinions, and experiences they rarely get to express fully. When someone listens with real attention, it feels generous. He gives examples of people who became memorable not by saying brilliant things, but by listening. A person may leave a conversation thinking you are fascinating when, in reality, you mostly gave them the rare gift of uninterrupted attention. This is both beautiful and slightly funny. Apparently, the bar for conversation is sometimes did not hijack the story within 12 seconds. Listening works because it satisfies several human needs at once. It gives respect. It gives safety. It gives importance. It lets the other person organize thoughts and feel understood. It also gives you information. You cannot influence someone wisely if you have not listened long enough to know what is actually moving them. Carnegie contrasts this with the habit of talking too much about ourselves. Many people do not listen. They reload. While the other person speaks, they prepare their next point, their better story, their correction, their advice, their joke, or their courtroom exhibit. The result is not conversation. It is two speeches taking turns being interrupted. The remedy is active curiosity. Ask questions you genuinely want answered. Let people finish. Do not rush to top their story. Notice what gives them energy. Ask for details. Let silence do some work. This habit is especially powerful in conflict. A person who feels unheard often becomes louder, sharper, and more defensive. Listening can lower the temperature. It does not mean agreement. It means you are willing to understand before trying to be understood. The fifth habit is to talk in terms of the other person's interests. This sounds obvious until you observe how rarely people do it. We talk about what interests us, then wonder why the other person looks like their soul has quietly left the meeting. Carnegie says that if you know what another person cares about, you have a bridge. Use it. He gives the example of Theodore Roosevelt, who prepared for guests by reading about topics that interested them. Roosevelt was already famous and powerful. He did not need to impress people in the ordinary sense. Yet he took the trouble to enter their world. That effort made people feel respected, and it made conversation come alive. The principle applies everywhere. If you're speaking with a client, understand their pressures. If you are speaking with a child, understand their imagination. If you're speaking with a friend, remember what they are excited about. If you're speaking with an expert, ask about the work they have spent years learning. People open when the topic touches what they value. This does not mean fake enthusiasm for everything. You do not have to become spiritually transformed by someone's database migration or antique spoon collection, but you can respect that it matters to them. You can ask why. You can notice the story underneath the interest. Mastery, memory, identity, ambition, beauty, belonging. Carnegie's deeper lesson is that conversation is hospitality. When you talk only in terms of your own interests, you invite people into your house and make them stand in the hallway. When you talk in terms of their interests, you create a room where they can sit down. The sixth habit is to make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. This returns us to one of the book's central ideas, the desire to feel important. Carnegie believes this desire is universal. People want to know that they matter, that their work matters, that their opinions are not invisible, that their presence is not merely tolerated. He quotes and retells many examples around this theme. A small courtesy, a respectful phrase, a moment of recognition, a bit of admiration honestly given. These can change the emotional direction of an encounter. The key is sincerity. Carnegie is not recommending oily flattery. He is asking you to find what is genuinely admirable, useful, interesting, or worthy in the other person. Then say it. Most people are starving for appreciation and suspicious of flattery at the same time. That means the words must be earned. One way to practice this is to ask, what can I honestly respect here? Maybe it is effort, maybe patience, maybe courage, maybe skill, maybe loyalty, maybe a detail most people miss. When you identify something real, your appreciation lands differently. This habit also includes courtesy. Phrases like, I am sorry to trouble you, would you be so kind, and thank you may seem old-fashioned, but Carnegie sees them as tools of dignity. They soften transactions and remind people they are not machines. In a world of rushed messages and blunt demands, courtesy can feel almost radical. It says, I see your time. I see your effort. I'm not entitled to you. The three habits in this part complete Carnegie's social foundation. Listen well. Enter the other person's interests. Make them feel important. Together with the previous part, the 6 ways to make people like you form a coherent approach. Be interested. Smile. Remember names. Listen. Talk about what matters to them. Give sincere importance. Notice what is missing. Carnegie does not say, dominate the room. He does not say, craft a flawless personal brand. He does not say, collect clever lines and deploy them like social fireworks. The book's path to being liked is mostly a path of humility. You become likable by reducing the burden you place on others. They do not have to fight for airtime. They do not have to prove they matter. They do not have to translate everything into your interests. They do not have to wonder whether you remember who they are. That is why these habits feel pleasant to receive. They are forms of relief. But Carnegie's advice also has limits if misunderstood. Making people feel important does not mean becoming fake, submissive, or endlessly agreeable. Listening does not mean having no boundaries. Talking in terms of another person's interests does not mean erasing your own. The point is not self-abandonment. It is social intelligence. You can hold your own goals and still respect the other person's inner world. In fact, Carnegie thinks you will reach your goals more often if you do. This section also prepares the ground for persuasion. Before people accept your ideas, they usually accept your presence. If they feel dismissed, ignored, or belittled, even good ideas arrive damaged. If they feel respected, your ideas have a place to land. The book's sequence matters. Carnegie does not begin with argument tactics. He begins with character in conversation. How do you make people feel? Do they feel enlarged or reduced after speaking with you? Do they leave with more energy or less? That question may be more revealing than any personality test. Thinking, starting with one of his most practical warnings. You cannot win an argument. The person who listens well gains more than affection. They gain access to the truth of what the other person actually cares about. There's a special kind of victory where you win the argument and lose the person. You prove the point. You arrange the facts beautifully. You expose the flaw. And the other person walks away more convinced than ever that you are unbearable. Carnegie looks at that outcome and asks a practical question. What exactly did you win, Carnegie? In this part, we begin the section on winning people to your way of thinking. We cover the first 6 methods. Avoid arguments, show respect for opinions, admit when you are wrong, begin in a friendly way, get the other person saying yes, and let them talk. The first principle is blunt. The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it. Carnegie does not mean avoid every disagreement. He means avoid the ego contest where both sides stop searching for truth and start defending identity. Arguments often fail because the emotional stakes become larger than the issue. A person who feels attacked will defend even a weak position because surrender now feels like humiliation. In an argument, facts are rarely alone. They arrive carrying pride, memory, status, fear, and the need not to look foolish. That is why public correction is so dangerous. Even when you are right, the other person's pride may become your opponent. Carnegie's practical advice is to welcome disagreement as information. Distrust your first defensive reaction. Control your temper. Listen first. Look for areas of agreement. Be honest about mistakes. And promise to think over the other person's ideas. The goal is not to dodge truth. It is to keep the relationship capable of reaching truth. This is very different from the pleasure of arguing. Many people enjoy the feeling of being right. It is crisp, energizing, and temporarily addictive. But Carnegie keeps asking what result you want. If the result is cooperation, trust, or changed thinking, the performance of superiority is usually expensive. The second principle is to show respect for the other person's opinions and never say, "You are wrong." Again, Carnegie is not saying all opinions are equally true. He is saying that directly telling someone they are wrong often triggers resistance before the discussion even begins. The words may be accurate, but the effect is defensive. He recommends softer openings. "I may be wrong. I often am. Let's examine the facts." That kind of language does two things. It lowers threat, and it invites shared investigation. The other person does not have to defend their intelligence before they can consider your point. This principle requires humility. You must leave room, at least in tone, for the possibility that you do not see everything. Sometimes you really are wrong. Sometimes you are partly right, but missing context. Sometimes you are right on the facts, but wrong in the way you present them. Carnegie wants you to stop turning every correction into a duel. The third principle is, if you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically. This is one of the book's strongest moves because it reverses the usual defensive pattern. When people expect excuses and you offer ownership, the conflict changes shape. There's less to attack. You have already done the honest thing. Carnegie gives examples where admitting fault disarms criticism. The key is speed and fullness. A grudging half apology, dragged out after evidence has cornered you, does not create the same effect. Quick admission shows strength. It tells the other person truth matters more than your ego. This habit also protects trust. People can forgive mistakes more easily than evasions. They can work with someone who says, "I was wrong." They struggle with someone who treats every error as a public relations problem. Carnegie's advice is practical. Say the hard thing yourself before someone else has to say it for you. Admit the mistake without theatrical self-destruction. Then move toward repair. The fourth principle is to begin in a friendly way. Carnegie returns to an old image. A drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall. If you begin with hostility, the other person is likely to respond in kind. If you begin with warmth, you create at least the possibility of openness. This does not mean flattery or weakness. It means tone matters. A friendly beginning tells the other person they are not under attack. It lowers the emotional walls. Even difficult conversations can begin with respect, appreciation, or common ground. Carnegie uses stories involving strikes, business disputes, and public disagreements to show how friendliness can accomplish what force cannot. When people feel respected, they can reconsider. When they feel cornered, they often harden. The modern version is everywhere. Emails that begin with accusation produce defensive replies. Meetings that begin with blame produce silence or counterattack. Family conversations that begin with "you always" usually go exactly as well as expected, which is to say poorly. Beginning friendly is not cosmetic. It is strategic kindness. The fifth principle is to get the other person saying yes immediately. Carnegie borrows from the Socratic method here. Begin with points of agreement. Ask questions that reveal shared facts, shared goals, or shared values. Each yes moves the conversation toward cooperation. Each early no can push the other person into a posture of resistance. This principle is not about trapping people with trick questions. It is about establishing common ground before approaching difference. If you and the other person both want safety, fairness, efficiency, peace, or success, start there. Let the conversation stand on agreement before asking it to carry disagreement. Carnegie understands the psychology of consistency. Once a person says no strongly, pride may make it harder to shift. Once they say yes to shared premises, they may be more willing to consider where those premises lead. The danger, of course, is manipulation. Used dishonestly, the yes sequence becomes a sales trap. Used honestly, it becomes a path of shared reasoning. The difference is whether you respect the other person's freedom to think. The sixth principle is to let the other person do a great deal of the talking. This connects back to listening, but now it serves persuasion. People trust conclusions more when they have participated in reaching them. If you talk too much, you may satisfy your own need to explain while starving the other person's need to be heard. Carnegie gives examples of salespeople, job seekers, and negotiators who succeeded by letting others express themselves. When someone talks, they reveal motives, objections, hopes, and fears. They also feel respected. If you interrupt too soon, you may answer the wrong concern. Letting others talk also reduces resistance because they're not being forced into a passive role. They are not merely receiving your argument. They're shaping the conversation. The more they speak, the more accurately you can respond. This principle is difficult for people who equate persuasion with talking. Carnegie flips that assumption. Persuasion often begins when you stop performing and start listening. These 6 methods form a pattern. Avoid ego battles. Do not insult the other person's intelligence. Own your mistakes. Begin warmly. Build agreement. Let them speak. The pattern is not weakness. It is emotional engineering. Carnegie is designing conversations where pride does not have to defend itself at every step. That matters because many disagreements are not solved at the level of information. The information may already be available. The obstacle is face, identity, fear, or resentment. Carnegie keeps showing that if you protect the human being, the idea has a better chance. This section also challenges a common fantasy. If your point is correct enough, delivery should not matter. Carnegie would say delivery always matters because people do not receive ideas in isolation. They receive ideas from someone, in a tone, at a moment, with implications for how they are seen. So the question is not merely, am I right? The question is, can I speak in a way that makes truth easier to accept? That is a much higher standard. It requires patience when you want to strike. It requires humility when you want to correct. It requires friendliness when you feel justified in being cold. It requires listening when your argument is already polished and desperate to be admired. Carnegie's advice is old, but it is not naive. He knows people are proud, sensitive, and stubborn because he knows we are all proud, sensitive, and stubborn. The book works when you stop applying it only to other people and notice yourself in the problem. The challenge. The strongest persuader is not the person who makes others feel defeated. It is the person who helps them arrive without losing dignity. People rarely love being pushed. They may comply, they may smile tightly, they may say interesting point in the tone people use when mentally leaving the building, but deep down, most people prefer ideas they feel they help discover. Carnegie knows this. The second half of his persuasion section is about helping people move without making them feel dragged. Dale Carnegie. In this part, we finish his methods for winning people to your way of thinking. Let others feel the idea is theirs, see things from their viewpoint, sympathize with their desires, appeal to nobler motives, dramatize your ideas, and throw down a challenge. The 7th principle is to let the other person feel that the idea is theirs. This is one of Carnegie's most psychologically subtle points. People support what they help create. If an idea arrives as an order, it may be resisted. If it emerges through questions, discussion, and ownership, it may be embraced. Carnegie gives examples from business and politics where leaders achieved more by suggesting than commanding. The goal is not to surrender the idea. It is to let the other person participate in shaping it. When people feel ownership, they bring energy instead of mere compliance. This principle is easy to misuse. If you pretend an idea is someone else's while secretly manipulating them, the method becomes dishonest. Carnegie's healthier version is collaborative. Ask for suggestions. Invite improvement. Leave room for the other person's contribution. Do not need all the credit. That last part matters. Many people sabotage cooperation because they need visible authorship. They want the solution, but they also want everyone to know whose genius produced it. Carnegie would quietly suggest choosing the result over the applause. Painful, yes, but sometimes adulthood is just letting a good idea work without demanding a parade. The eighth principle is to try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. This may be the moral center of the book. Carnegie repeatedly asks readers to leave their own perspective and enter the other person's world. Not to agree with everything, not to excuse everything, to understand. He argues that if you ask yourself why the other person thinks and acts as they do, you can avoid anger and gain influence. The word honestly matters. You cannot merely use empathy as a costume. You have to try to see the pressures, desires, fears, habits, and incentives that make their behavior make sense to them. This is useful in sales, leadership, parenting, friendship, and conflict. A customer may fear risk. An employee may fear embarrassment. A child may want independence. A partner may want reassurance. A critic may want respect. If you miss the inner motive, your response may be technically correct and emotionally useless. Seeing from another viewpoint does not mean losing your own. It means adding theirs to the map. With a bigger map, you can choose a better route. The ninth principle is to be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires. Carnegie suggests a phrase that captures the spirit. I do not blame you one bit for feeling as you do. If I were you, I would undoubtedly feel just as you do. That sentence works because it lowers isolation. It tells the other person their feelings are understandable. When people feel understood, they often become more willing to understand in return. Sympathy is especially powerful when someone is angry or hurt. Our instinct is often to defend, correct, or minimize. Carnegie advises acknowledgement first. You can disagree later, but if you skip sympathy, the other person may not be able to hear anything else. This is not fake agreement. You can sympathize with a feeling without accepting every conclusion drawn from it. You can understand why someone is upset and still set a boundary. You can say, I see why that bothered you, without saying, therefore everything you did afterward was perfect. Carnegie's insight is that people often need emotional recognition before rational discussion becomes possible. The 10th principle is to appeal to the nobler motives. Carnegie believes people like to see themselves as decent, fair, generous, honest, and responsible. When you appeal to those better motives, you invite them to act in line with their preferred identity. This is not the same as accusing them of selfishness. In fact, it is the opposite. Instead of saying, you're trying to cheat me, you might say, I know you want to be fair about this. Instead of saying, you're irresponsible, you might say, I know you care about doing this properly. You call forward the better self. Of course, not every motive is noble all the time. People are mixed. Carnegie knows that, but he argues that appealing to the better motive often works better than attacking the worse one. If you treat someone as honorable, you give them a path to behave honorably without losing face. This principle can be powerful in leadership. People often rise to expectations when those expectations are sincere and credible. If you assume the worst loudly enough, you may help create it. If you appeal to the best, you may give it room to appear. The 11th principle is to dramatize your ideas. Carnegie understands attention. A plain statement may be true, but truth sometimes needs presentation. Newspapers, advertisers, teachers, and public speakers all dramatize because people remember what they can see and feel. Dramatizing an idea means making it vivid. Use a demonstration, a story, a contrast, an image, a concrete example. Do not merely say a problem is costly. Show the cost. Do not merely say a product saves time. Make the save time visible. Do not merely say a habit matters. Tell the story of what happens when it is ignored. The principle is not to exaggerate. It is to embody the point. Human beings are moved by scenes more than abstractions. Carnegie's own book proves this. He does not simply list principles. He wraps them in stories of presidents, business leaders, families, criminals, actors, and students. The examples carry the lesson. If your idea matters, make it alive enough to be remembered. The 12th principle is, when nothing else works, throw down a challenge. Carnegie ends the persuasion section with competition, pride, and the desire to excel. People are often motivated by the chance to test themselves, beat a standard, prove ability, or rise to a meaningful challenge. A challenge can awaken energy that instructions do not. He gives examples from industry and leadership where people responded to being trusted with a difficult goal. The challenge works because it says, I believe you are capable of more. It appeals to ambition and self-respect. But this principle must be used carefully. A challenge that humiliates or manipulates can backfire. A good challenge is clear, fair, and tied to pride and achievement. It does not sneer. It summons. Together, these 6 principles complete Carnegie's persuasion method. Let others own ideas. See from their viewpoint. Sympathize. Appeal to their best self. Dramatize. Challenge. The full section shows that persuasion is not a hammer. It is a set of doors. Some people open through agreement. Some through being heard. Some through sympathy. Some through noble identity. Some through vivid imagination. Some through challenge. The unifying discipline is respect. Carnegie wants influence without unnecessary humiliation. He knows that people are more likely to change when they can preserve dignity, feel understood, and see a path that serves their own values. This is why the book remains useful beyond sales or networking. It is really about reducing resistance by reducing threat. Many conversations fail because we make the other person's pride guard the door. Carnegie teaches us how to knock differently. There's also a personal cost. To use these principles well, you must surrender some ego rewards. You may not get to win the argument publicly. You may not get all the credit. You may not get to deliver the devastating line you composed in the shower. A tragedy, obviously. Literature may survive, but you may get something better: cooperation, trust, movement, and a relationship that remains usable after the conversation ends. That is Carnegie's trade. Less domination, more influence. Leadership often fails at the exact moment it becomes most certain it is right. Someone has made a mistake. Something must change. The leader sees the problem clearly and charges in with correction, authority, and perhaps the emotional grace of a dropped toolbox. Carnegie's final section asks a better question. How do you change people without making them resent the change? Welcome back to this book summary series on how to win friends and influence people by Dale Carnegie. In this final part, we cover the leadership section, begin with praise, correct indirectly, admit your own mistakes, ask questions instead of giving orders. Let people save face, praise improvement, give a good reputation to live up to, make faults seem easy to correct, and make people glad to do what you suggest. The first leadership principle is to begin with praise and honest appreciation. Carnegie compares criticism to a barber who lathers before shaving. The preparation matters. If you must correct someone, begin by recognizing what is good, useful, or improved. This is not flattery. It is context. A person who feels wholly condemned will resist. A person who feels valued may be able to hear correction. The order matters because correction threatens identity. Praise reminds the person they are more than the mistake. It keeps the conversation from becoming a verdict on their entire worth. The second principle is to call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. Carnegie warns that the word but can erase praise. You did a good job, but often means the listener stops believing the first half. He prefers approaches that preserve encouragement while still guiding improvement. Sometimes a small indirect cue works better than a direct rebuke. This principle is not about being vague when clarity is needed. It is about choosing the least humiliating, effective correction. If the person can understand the problem without being publicly struck by it, why strike? The third principle is to talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. This is humility as leadership technique. When you admit your own history of error, the correction becomes less of a thrown speech. You are not the flawless judge descending from Mount Competence. You are a human being who has also learned through mistakes. Carnegie gives examples of leaders who softened criticism by acknowledging their own shortcomings first. This helps because it reduces shame. The message becomes, I have struggled too, and improvement is possible, rather than, I am superior and you are the problem. The fourth principle is to ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Orders can create obedience, but questions can create ownership. Instead of saying, do this now, a leader might ask, what do you think would happen if we tried this? How could we handle this deadline? What approach would make the customer feel heard? Questions invite thought. They allow people to participate in the solution. Carnegie is not denying that direct orders are sometimes necessary. But as a default, questions preserve dignity and develop judgment. They also reduce resentment because the person is not treated as a tool. The fifth principle is to let the other person save face. This may be one of Carnegie's most humane leadership rules. People can survive bad news, correction, even failure, if they're not needlessly humiliated. Saving face means protecting someone's dignity while handling the issue. Carnegie gives examples of managers and public figures who understood this. A dismissal, demotion, refusal, or correction can be handled brutally or respectfully. The facts may be the same. The human damage is not. Saving face matters because humiliation lingers. People remember not only what happened, but how small they were made to feel. A leader who protects dignity builds trust, even in hard moments. The sixth principle is to praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Carnegie returns to encouragement as a force. People grow toward recognition. If you notice only failure, you train discouragement. If you notice progress, even small progress, you strengthen the behavior you want. This is especially important when someone is learning. Early improvement is fragile. A person trying to change may not yet be good, but they may be better. Carnegie wants leaders to catch that movement and reinforce it. He also recommends being hearty in approbation and lavish in praise. Modern ears may hear that as too much, but his point is clear. Do not be stingy with sincere encouragement. Many leaders ration praise, as if it were a non-renewable resource. Then they wonder why morale looks like a houseplant in a windowless room. The seventh principle is to give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. This is one of Carnegie's most powerful ideas. If you want someone to improve, treat them as though the desired quality is already within reach. Give them an identity that calls forth better behavior. Honest, capable, reliable, thoughtful, careful, brave. People often act in line with the reputation they believe others hold of them. If you label someone hopeless, they may stop trying. If you tell them you see real ability, they may work to justify that faith. This principle must be sincere. You cannot invent a reputation from nothing and expect magic, but you can identify a seed of strength and speak to it. You could say, I know you care about quality. I have seen you handle hard things. You're the kind of person who can fix this. That kind of belief can be deeply motivating. The eighth principle is to use encouragement and make the faults seem easy to correct. When a problem feels enormous, people freeze. Carnegie advises leaders to make improvement feel possible. Break it down. Emphasize progress. Show the next step. Reduce the emotional size of the fault without denying it. This works because confidence affects performance. If someone believes they are incapable, they may not even begin. A leader's job is often to make the first step feel reachable. The ninth principle is to make the other person happy about doing the thing you suggest. This final rule gathers many earlier ideas. People cooperate more readily when they see how the action serves their wants, identity, pride, convenience, or values. Do not merely impose the task. Frame it in a way that gives meaning or benefit. Carnegie gives examples of requests made more appealing by considering the other person's perspective. The principle returns to the fishing lesson from the beginning. Bait the hook with what the fish wants. In leadership, that means connect the work to the person's motives. The final section shows Carnegie's view of leadership as influence with care. A leader must correct, but correction should not become cruelty. A leader must guide, but guidance should not erase dignity. A leader must get results, but results are better when people keep their self-respect. Across the whole book, the pattern is remarkably consistent. Do not criticize. Appreciate. Understand wants. Show interest. Listen. Respect opinions. Admit mistakes. Begin friendly. Let others talk. See from their viewpoint. Preserve dignity. Encourage improvement. Carnegie is not offering a bag of tricks. He is offering a view of human nature. People want importance, respect, agency, sympathy, and hope. If you work with those needs, influence becomes easier. If you trample them, even correct ideas become hard to accept. The book also has an ethical test. These methods can be used selfishly, and Carnegie's language sometimes sounds very practical, almost transactional. But the best reading is not, how do I make people do what I want? It is, how do I pursue my goals while treating people in a way that preserves their dignity? That question keeps the book alive. Some advice in how to win friends and influence people may feel old-fashioned in style, but the emotional mechanics remain current. People still hate being criticized. They still like being appreciated. They still enjoy hearing their name. They still want to talk about what matters to them. They still resist humiliation. Apparently, the human operating system has not received a major update. So the final lesson is not complicated. Before speaking, ask what your words will do to the other person's pride, importance, and willingness to cooperate. Before correcting, ask whether dignity can survive the correction. Before persuading, ask whether you understand what the other person wants. Carnegie's world is full of business people, presidents, salesmen, families, students, and public figures. But beneath all those stories is one repeated invitation. Make people feel human, and they will often become easier to reach. Thank you for listening to this full series on how to win friends and influence people. The book's promise is not that everyone will like you, or that every conversation will go your way. The promise is more practical. If you lead with respect, interest, appreciation, and empathy, you stop making human nature your enemy.